9 o'clock. Good morning. It's July 15th. And yesterday we had no air conditioning in here. I don't know if anyone on Zoom could feel that we were, and it reminded me of another time when some people making much larger decisions a long time ago were sitting in a courtroom sweating in July. Does anybody get the reference? No. Okay. Declaration of Independence. It was very hot in the, not that we're doing the Declaration of Independence here, but someone told me I should reference the musical. So today, just a little bit of lighthearted fun. We are down to the last, what, Sarah? 15 items, 14, 15 items?
I think about 16.
16 items. These are work sessions. We don't make any final decisions at these work sessions. We also don't take any public comment. If you'd like to provide public comment, we welcome public comment in writing or giving us a phone call. And you are also welcome to join us tomorrow at our 5:30 business meeting and share your thoughts during our general public comment section. With that, I'll turn it over to Sarah. I think we were on headquarters in Bert Nash.
Yeah, commissioners, do you want to see kind of the combined consensus to worksheet first, or do you just want to keep plowing through and kind of look at it maybe at the end?
Which one? Say that again.
So do you want to review some of the tentative decisions you made yesterday?
No,
Okay.
I say we keep going down the track.
All right.
We were on yesterday.
We'll keep going. Sorry, Brooke. All right.
Our first decision. Okay. Not making any decisions here. But.
No, tentative, maybe sort of where we are. All right. We stopped at headquarters and there were 3 commissioners that were interested in some sort of various levels of funding or partial funding. And I just want to be clear, there are several, there was a 24, this was related to the 24. I don't know if commissioners felt differently about 24, 25, and then they have requested funding in 26. Even though we don't have the right forms, but that could have been a staff community partner mix up.
I think some of the conversation we'd had like Friday, I suppose it was the difference between how we felt about retroactive requests when we did not have an agreement with that partner versus kind of specifically for headquarters moving forward. Like, what's our interest as a county of working with that with the crisis line? Like, what's the value that's specific to Douglas County, separate from what is the statewide program? And I think that's kind of where we left it, right?
To that, commissioners, I'm a little reluctant to try to make that determination about, what the value of that local crisis line is and what level of support it should get or would be recommended to get from the county in July. I'd rather spend some time. We're doing some crisis system strategic planning work. I'd rather go through that process and have a better sense of that. I mean, commissioners can decide what you want to fund, but I mean, if you want our recommendation as to what that looks like, I think it's going to take more time.
I think it's the question there is like taking more time for 2026 funding or taking more time and then hitting it again next budget cycle, because just given the difficulties that headquarters has gone through, I think that would be like how long can they kind of maintain what they're doing without some additional funding?
Other thoughts?
Actually, that was a question for Sarah. I didn't phrase it very well. Are you talking about having that conversation, like having a set money aside and having a conversation that would still apply to 2026 funding? Or are you talking about having that conversation throughout the year and having them apply for 27?
Commissioners, I would do whatever you would prefer in that situation. I mean, if you would prefer that we hold some funds aside for 2026 and have that conversation, we could do that, or we could just wait until 2027. I would say here, commissioners, like, this was also an agency that has no board. right now and is not completed its 2024 audit. And so I'm a little nervous about, you know, I think the organization needs a little more time to stand up some of that infrastructure as well. But I mean, in terms of 26 or 27, that's up to the commission.
That having a board doesn't necessarily mean better governance.
It doesn't, but it certainly doesn't help. But
I think we have similar problems in both headquarters and Bird Nash. They both have a cash flow problem because they ate through all of their reserve funds and they're living hand to mouth. And if we don't want to sponsor a local crisis line, that's one thing for the future, but in the past, they have done the work. So I think they do need some money for the work they've performed.
What I put in my notes was that I'm recommending funding, but the standard or the rubric that I'm using for entities that either don't have a board or the county is waiting on an audit, the recommendation that I put down is that we need to hold the funding until we receive the audit and we review the findings from the audit so that we can make a determination on the level of funding to include the development of the board, since that seems to be the prior recommendation that I've been consistently hearing from the commissioners who weighed in on this in the prior year, since we had 3 commissioners prior and we brought on 2 new commissioners. And there's a lack of understanding, at least on my part, in regards to whether there was a contract, whether there wasn't a contract, and or whether or not from,
there was no contract for 2024 or 2025.
okay, all right.
There was a budget in 24, though.
There was a budget, but no contract.
I had
Budgeted
thought,
line item. But I tell you, we put lots of things on a budgeted line item, and unless they're actually expensed properly, they don't get paid.
I thought that the former CEO had signed a contract and the county didn't countersign it.
I think that was
That was
3,
24.
4. I never executed the 24 agreement. And the commission was aware of that decision. Because at the time, the board was disintegrated.
Okay, all right. And so I think that's maybe where it gets just a little bit confusing. And so that's where kind of where I stand is the fact that we need the audit. We need to understand where headquarters stands in the development of the board so that we can make a good determination on 24 and 25 funding. We have an ask for 26 funding. And then I believe I understand that the 23 funding has been approved, correct?
The 23 funding, there was a signed contract. We halted payment on it while things were going wrong. I would recommend that we move forward after the budget and pay them for 23 based off that agreement. So I'll be bringing that to you after budget for 23.
Okay. And so that's where my recommendation stands at this point. But I also want to say, like, as I look across our landscape, that's also where I'm landing as a standard.
So a couple of things as I was thinking about this funding and Burnt Nash, both past funding, was that the board of these organizations is ultimately responsible for the fiscal health of their organizations and the running of those organizations. If they get into challenges, we recognize the value of the service, but I think that board also has to recognize their, what I would call part of the mess, right? That they have a responsibility as well. And lack of oversight or, um, those types of challenges, I would like to see a board step up. What I am proposing is that for, or at least for us to talk about and think about is for, I added up what Bert Nash's request was and the years of headquarters in the past costs, and it came to be 1.5 million. And my thinking was that that's a huge influx of cash from us for things that have happened in the past. What I'd like to see, I think a little bit to what you're saying, Commissioner Anderson, is I'd like to see the board step up and have some engagement there. I'd like the Bert Nash board to also take some ownership of that. That doesn't mean we can't be partners in it. And so I took half of that money and put it in our one-time budget and said, like, let's have a conversation. If you can match those dollars, if you're saying, hey, we recognize that headquarters needs to keep going as a community, therefore we're putting money towards it, then we also as a county can say, we've seen some aggressive moves to bring this organization back into good financial standing, and then we can support that. It was just an idea I had. I didn't pass it by Sarah or Brooke or anybody, but I was trying to think of a way of not to let, what I don't want is for there to be an impression that the county let these agencies down and that's why they failed. I think we can place someone in a role of helping, but I also want to see our community and a board for those organizations step up to that challenge as well.
I'm a little confused. Right, because you were taking two different organizations and putting a single funding pool aside, and that seems like it could get a little tricky.
Yes.
Is it possible to kind of talk through the method you're talking about, but keep them separate?
I think that would be fine. I mean, we could just, because it comes out of our one-time funds, I mean, we're holding those dollars. So yeah, I mean, we could do that.
And you're talking specifically about not 2026 requests, but requests that are for prior years. And that's the part that I get uncomfortable with.
Totally understand that. But from what I understood in our hearings and with conversations with some of these organizations, their fiscal health is in such a place that if some cash doesn't come in, to Commissioner Dorsey's point, whether they continue to exist or not is a challenge. I think we put it out there for them. My thinking is we put it out there for them as a challenge. Go raise this money. Go put your board together. I mean, headquarters needs go put it together, get some money raised, and then we can help with that. It's just an idea. It may not have all the commissioners' support for it. So I just wanted to toss it out there.
I think the problem in getting a board for headquarters is I don't think that'll happen till after a 2024 audit is complete, because I don't think anyone wants to walk into a situation that they don't really know what the situation is. So I think that's probably going to have to be done first. And that's a month or two or three away from concluding. My comments on Bert Nash are they're locked into contracts with us saying we will only give you $1.6 million for TRC after all other funding is exhausted. Well, that was written, what, 2-3 years ago, and I thought it was 22.
It was updated every year. The dollar amount's updated every year.
Yeah, that's the amount they asked for last year at budget time.
Well, I'm not sure they asked for enough. I would say those contracts have to be looked at and redeveloped. I read somewhere about increasing manpower over at TRC. Part of the problem over there is you don't know if 3 people are going to walk in a day or 15 or 20 people. And you pretty much got to plan for the higher number, even though you may not need people. So some days they're sitting around and other days everybody's stressed out because there's too many people. I kind of agree with your idea overall, though. If either one of those organizations fail, I think under statute 39 of state statutes, the county becomes responsible.
Only for Bert Nash. And I guess that's what I would say is that these two, I appreciate your desire to look at them together. They are very different organizations and in very different situations. And so I'm not sure it helps to look at them as this. You may end up in the same place, but there are only about 2 other counties in the entire state of Kansas that do any sort of funding towards a local crisis line. Primarily, headquarters service is a state-funded service to support 988. They will exist if we do not pay them because the state will continue to contract with them for 988 services. And we are a small part of the work that they do. Bert Nash is different. It is designated by the Board of County Commissioners as the Community Mental Health Center. I do not think we are obligated to stand one up, but we are obligated to name one. So I think statutorily, they're very different organizations.
Yeah, that's what I was sitting here and thinking about, Sarah, is that I can appreciate that throughout our budget deliberations so far, there's been similarities drawn specifically around, this thread of requests that are for prior year funds, and that's the connection. But otherwise, I do agree with Sarah that there are particularities to each organization and the services that we are invested in as a county. And even some differences in what their status quo is, right? They both are facing, financial crisis, but under different circumstances in different facts at play. So I do think it's important to try and parse them out still and talk about some particularities. My feeling about headquarters is I really struggle with getting behind the idea that we would allocate dollars to services that we never had a contract for. So the 2023 payment that Sarah has said will come to us in the nearish future once that audit is received and reviewed. And that is an example of, a contractual obligation. In 2024, we allocated and we planned for it, and then lots of things changed really fast. And we adapted by changing, the way 988 was being answered and MRT was being dispatched in particular. And then a funding agreement was never executed. And so while I can certainly understand and appreciate the perspective of their organization around the 2024 funding request to some degree, I think that, I understand their point of view about it. I still struggle to support that one, though, because we never executed a contract and we, shifted funding and adapted plans otherwise to still maintain responsibility for an investment in MRT in particular, and ensure that the way 988 was being handled, to Sarah's point, was really the state's issue to sort of navigate. So the larger conversation about whether or not Douglas County could or should be invested in a local crisis line is sure one that we should have, but it hasn't come to us before these budget requests. And so I feel uncomfortable allocating dollars retroactively when we haven't made a decision that that's an investment. And then so that for me, the 2025 dollars make even less sense because there was no budget request and no discussion that we've been made aware of that there was an expectation of the county for those services to continue. That was a choice of the organization. And so I really struggle with funding them retroactively. And I personally did not read their request as that there was a 2026 request on the table, but if staff are telling us that they believe that that's a request that's before us, then maybe that's a different one to unpack more, but that's not how I'm reading the budget book. So those are my feelings about headquarters. I personally can't support the retroactive funding as much as I believe in their organization and the mission. It just, it doesn't make any sense to me that we would retroactively fund for non-contracted services that they made a choice to continue and didn't ask us directly for money. So 2024 is a little bit of a wonky year, but the course of events made it so that we shifted gears in a different direction and we did not contract for those dollars. So why would we pay them years later? So I'll leave that there. And then I have thoughts about Bert Nash too, but I do think we should take it one at a time.
I agree. It helps me take these one at a time. I appreciate drawing the parallel, but I think we have to tackle them separately. I'm with Commissioner Reed on the retroactive funding. I think that opens the door to things that I think would get us in trouble in the long run of other organizations saying, well, you know, we had a service that we thought you'd like, and now we want you to pay for it. In the past, like, we use our contracts to really tie things back to the metrics that we want, the conversations that we want, the value that we want to see for taxpayer dollars. So I think those contracts are important. I'm not, and didn't necessarily feel that way when we were starting the conversation, but kind of have come to that the retroactive dollars as retroactive make me uncomfortable. However, I do think that there was kind of a glitch in the process or a not understanding about how to fill out the forms for the 2026 funding. I think it was entirely intended as part of this. And I recognize that we don't have the things in place that we need yet, the board and the audits and such, but I could see holding some dollars for that conversation that, we're talking about. It's because the 988 is a state service, but Douglas County is, of course, unique in how we are viewing our crisis ecosystem or service organization overall. And we do often ask for things that are not necessarily being asked for by other counties. So I think to have that conversation, setting some dollars aside within the 2026 budget cycle, but being really specific about what we would want to see have happen and have that, not that those dollars would be necessarily committed to headquarters, but that we'd hold them for that conversation about what is the value to Douglas County for crisis line services.
I think one thing that's not in headquarters request is the reason they have the gap is because KDAD's cut $750,000 out of their budget last year. They were supposed to have $3.7 million. So KDAD's cut $750,000, gave that to Bert Nash. Bert Nash gave it back, and headquarters didn't get the $750,000 back. So this gap that they're facing is the result of the funding that KDAD's cut.
We've got half a year left this year. If we think they're providing a worthwhile service, we could sign a agreement for the last half of this year.
So headquarters has been providing the local crisis line since the 60s, and it's always been their program and their project. Douglas County didn't have anything to do with it. Douglas County Commission funding didn't have anything to do with it until 2019. That's my understanding. Give me a nod. 2022 is the first time that we funded anything for headquarters. And I think that was specific to some of the things we were asking them to do that they're currently not doing. So I don't feel that that it's a foregone conclusion that because the crisis line exists, therefore Douglas County should pay for it, because in the long history of headquarters, we haven't. But we also are building a more robust crisis intervention system, and a crisis line is a big part of that. Is what's provided by the state sufficient? And if that state contract went to somebody else other than headquarters, would we still be getting our needs met? Or do we have some specific ownership and needs and requirements of local crisis line that are different? That's the conversation that I think we need to have. I don't think we need to make the assumption that because they're answering phone lines, which is part of their mission for many years, that we need to pay them to do the mission that they've always done. I think we need a larger conversation.
Yeah, I want to separate sort of I appreciate the idea that I probably shouldn't have lumped them together. I was just trying to think about it in a different way. And I agree, we should separate them. I also want to separate if we're going to look at headquarters funding for 2024 and 25, I want to separate that from the request that we have for 2026, because I think they're different things. So if we look at the funding for the past, I agree with Commissioner Reed and that we shouldn't get in the habit of paying for services that we didn't have a contract on. And I think I made that clear in the hearing that I didn't love that. I also recognize that we have a significant fund balance and that sometimes we have situations which are not ideal. I would not say like the money that I'm suggesting we put aside was necessarily for the services rendered. That was not, it is more of how do we make sure the services that are still here? If I would rather headquarters be funded by the state, to be honest, and not to be part of it. It hasn't been ours. I'm not sure we need a local crisis number. In meeting with Mr. Watkins, I think he would say that we may need to let that go. But I do recognize that we have a fund balance, and fund balances are for emergencies. And if this organization is in an emergency situation, I think that's where I was applying some of those one-time funds for.
And I'm open to that context.
I'm also open to that. I don't know what dollar amount we land on. And, you know, Commissioner Willie, I heard you express an interest in sort of entertaining the request for 2026 that maybe is just not fully fleshed out and understood the way that all the other supplemental requests were. That number feels high to me as a set aside, and I think I would be more interested in the idea that, sure, to Commissioner Kelly's point, like our ability to sometimes help in emergencies under certain circumstances with much more information than we have available now, I would say, is a thing that I'm open to. But to me, that's I guess I'm just unsure how to really prescribe a dollar amount to that and a set aside in our commissioner contingency as we would in these other typical ways, because $350K feels really significant to me. And that request is specifically tied to services for a crisis line versus the larger conversation about how might the county be able to help ensure that you can restabilize after certain things are in place. So that's the part that I'm struggling with, but I'm open to that framing of it. I'm not very open to any of their budget requests personally. I just don't think that we don't have consensus amongst the commission or enough information, in my opinion, to reach consensus about whether or not that's an important piece of our crisis continuum in the community, and therefore a piece that we want to invest ongoing dollars in. or even one-time dollars. So.
But let's see if we can get some consensus here. I think we have consensus that that we don't want to fund the 2024 and 2025 request, but we may have some consensus that we want to put some funds aside to have a more, to talk about how we might how we might help a organization headquarters specifically to stay solvent. And we don't have to decide that today. We just have to decide on a dollar amount that we'd like to set aside. Does that feel accurate to people?
Is this something that the county has done in the past?
We've certainly set funds aside and had organizations come back to us with a more fully fleshed out proposal. We've done that both internally with things like drug court, behavioral health court. When those first started, we kind of set aside rough dollar amounts. And then they came back with a better proposal. Yeah, I think this is, as long as everybody understands, both from the commission perspective and from the community partners perspective, that this isn't necessarily an obligation for ongoing funding. It might be used in the current year, or it might be used as one time until we kind of get to a more fleshed out perspective that is brought before the county commission for consideration. That's what I think you're proposing, right?
And I should have reframed. I meant solvency funding.
Oh, well, yeah, Lawrence Community Shelter, we set a small amount of funds aside when, I think twice when Lawrence Community Shelter was having issues.
I'm thinking about, although different circumstances, Trinity and Home.
Yeah,
To
not,
some
didn't quite
degree,
get
that
that
was
bad, but it was
year-
getting there.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
not as, they weren't without a board, for an example, but they were definitely facing closure, and we were able to help them avoid that with some additional infusion. But
Yeah, those are probably the two best examples.
Okay. I was just seeking to understand if we were setting a precedent, but a precedent has already been set.
I don't love
Yep.
the press,
No,
the P word.
I know,
Because
but I'm
every
just trying to
situation
understand.
is different
Yeah.
and unique, but we have done, this doesn't feel completely outside of the realm of things the county commission has considered from that perspective.
I would say, I think headquarters is on the upswing. I mean, I think they've made so much progress, and that should be part of the conversation too. Like, we're being asked to help out, but they've also, okay, they don't have a board at the moment, but the conservator, so, Dan Watkins, who's been named in front of that, has really addressed so many of the concerns that bothered us in 2023 and 2024. So it's helping to keep an organization solvent that is also helping itself.
yeah, I appreciate that point, Commissioner Willie, and wanted to make sure I was clear in that. Like, I have really appreciated the effort and intentionality that their staff and organization has done to save it from dissolution so far, and that the lack of a board right now is because of failure of a previous board. But staff worked really hard to save that organization, and I really do acknowledge that. And if we can be helpful and part of the solution, I'm definitely interested in that. I just want it to be intentional. So I think for me, like, sure, there to some degree a precedent has been set, and this doesn't just set a precedent, but it's one that is an intentional process that really takes into consideration the totality of circumstances, and is a more holistic perspective about it, and how we can really be strategic about our investment to help solvency versus the starting a precedent of retroactive funding and sort of like plugging holes without having a fuller picture. I think that that's the distinction for me that in this conversation.
And would this come out of the mental health fund? Is that what we're thinking?
That would be my recommendation, to be the behavioral health sales tax.
Behavioral health sales tax.
Of one-time funds.
If it's of one-time funds, yeah. but.
Which is a difference from the, I mean, the request, well, the retroactive requests are for one-time funds, but if we were to look at a ongoing funding request, that's a significant, dip into those ongoing funds. So I would be comfortable with it staying in the one-time allocation of mental health sales tax.
Do we know what the state is doing in 26?
Or 988? Or 988? I don't know what their 26 funding amount is at this point. We could try to get that from headquarters.
I think they're meeting on Thursday, actually, with KDADS.
Okay.
I think that's really where I want to hear where the state is in that process with them. Pulling together a board, certainly if we're going to have any contracts, I want the contract to be with the board, not a court appointed, no fault to Mr. Watkins, but not the court appointed executive director. But I just think we have to understand that the state, as Bob told us, pulled back money. Is there any move on the state to bring some of those funding dollars back in because they continued to run 988? Those are the things that I think need to play out. But I do want to honor that our one-time funding sometimes is needed in these emergency situations. I'm interested to hear Sarah say that we would take it out of mental health fund balance. We could take it out of our overall fund balance. We don't necessarily have to. And we had sort of said we were reserving that for capital. So I think.
I guess I was thinking that we would use, since there were so many requests for one, what I would call stopgap funding or for behavioral health organizations, and they were paid out of the behavioral health sales tax in the past. That's why I was thinking that. As I mentioned to commissioners, I'd like to move that to capital after this year, so that we clearly send a message to the community that those funds can only be used for capital projects. But we have not done that to date. So that's the reason why I suggest it, but it really could come out of either place.
And I would just reaffirm again, I'd like to see their board and their supporters step up to match our support. But
I would agree. Yes. I'm in favor of that as well.
So I would see taking this out of one-time funds with the behavioral health, to the behavioral health fund. And then if we come to an agreement that that the county wants to be an ongoing partner, then they would apply as a supplemental request next year, and we would consider them as a new partner. That's kind of how I'm framing it.
what are you thinking for the supplemental request? You mentioned there's been some confusion about that.
You mean for the 2027 budget? I think the process.
The
would be clear.
2026 budget. You're saying something.
I think
didn't.
they're saying something different. Like next, if
Oh,
we,
next.
if we work through this funding we've set aside and we decide that, yes, we want to have an ongoing relationship in funding of headquarters, then they would come back to us through the 2027 budget cycle as a supplement, as an addition to ongoing funding. Because I think that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a one-time set aside to have that fuller conversation.
And this would either be funding that could be allocated in 2025 or 2026, depending on when the agreement is reached and brought back to the commission for consideration.
I think
And then
so.
they would apply again in March of 2026 for 2027. Do you have a dollar amount you're thinking?
I agree. 350 sounds like a lot. Well, I don't know.
75,
What'd you say?
275.
I was going to recommend 175, actually.
I'd say if we're looking at like an ongoing, if we're going to have this conversation about how much would Douglas County want to partner on an ongoing basis, I think that number will probably be fairly modest. If we're looking at trying to help an organization stay and become solvent, it might be a larger number for this particular set aside, is my thought. Well, no. I guess in my head I had 300, but the 275 is also in that ballpark. I think the 175 is probably too low to accomplish what we might be wanting to with it. So
Because you
I
might
guess I'd say-
potentially be looking at 2 fiscal years. Is that kind of part of your calculus in that?
fiscal year and a half.
Yeah, that's what
So-
that's, if you're thinking 25 and 26.
300, or maybe go up to the full 350. What do commissioners think?
The money's in the account, and I think we need to see what the state is going to do. If we're just reserving out of the 18 million, I would recommend 400,000.
Like to set expectations that are reasonable for our partners. So just if you say 400,000, they're going to think they're going to get 400,000.
And we're also asking them to match. So I would like to set expectations that they can actually match. And if they've had issues fundraising up to this point, I would like them to feel like they can actually meet that expectation. So 300 might be, I mean, I realize it's only another $100, but still fundraising can be difficult in this climate. And when you have multiple nonprofits across Douglas County that are also fundraising.
Of course, I didn't bring my whole notebook and I knew it was gonna bite me. It's okay.
Are you looking for their fundraising budget?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a quick glance at what their total line was there, but thank you. Teamwork. Thank you, Commissioner Kelly.
I would imagine the last few years have been rough for fundraising,
Yeah.
just for the same reason that we're having discussions here.
Right, and I think that, I mean, to be fair, just good old fashioned board and or, community fundraising is probably not going to be able to match the dollars. We're also talking about state dollars, right? And wanting to understand more about that. So I think it's hard to base it off that. These numbers are low, but I don't, my head is at 250,000. It's $250,000 to set aside as potential help for solvency, which feels significant still. It's less than what they say a year of operating costs if we were to fund what they are currently doing and currently wish for us to fund. Anything above that, I'm personally uncomfortable with, but I mean, to be fair, like picking a number it's a weird exercise without a real specific request for that. We've sort of, that piece of it is unique. We don't pick the numbers. We're usually working off of a number that they're requesting. But we're sort of changing what the framework of we're saying sort of no to their request, but yes to potential solvency funding. So 250 is where.
I'm okay with 250.
We're looking at mean, median, or mode, because we have 175, 250, 275, 300, and 400.
Well, for a
is
minute, it felt like an auction to
Yeah.
me, so it's a different way of looking at it.
I'd say 250 would be probably on the low side for a set aside for me, but it's doable. I'd probably be more of the 300. So pitch it across the table.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at solvency, I would land closer to 300 as well. So yeah, 300.
Oh, come down.
All right, I think we've landed with 3 commissioners at 300, so I think we're good there.
Thank you.
That only took 45 minutes, commissioners, so.
Better than I thought.
good
Sorry,
going day.
before we move on.
Yeah.
And the 80,255, which was invoiced in 2023, but they hadn't actually fulfilled what they were invoicing us for, I'm okay to turn loose of that, given all of the progress that they've made.
I envisioned that would be on top of or in addition to what this allocation was.
If there's an agreement on that, do we need to vote on that again, or can that just be paid?
I'd like it to come back before you since it's a prior year. I'd just like to put it on an agenda when I get that. We may have a small agreement that we haven't really worked up yet. So I'd prefer to make sure you saw it again. Just for the auditors, because then technically it wasn't an allocated purchase in this fiscal year. So I'd like to make sure there's a good audit trail.
Was 23, was that under the mental health sales tax or was that general?
No, behavioral health.
Okay.
Yep.
Ready to move on, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Okay, so Commissioners, yes, good, okay. Bert Nash's 2026 TRC funding supplemental, which was 1.25. And we had 3 commissioners that had various levels of fundress or interest in reduction. I'll just share my thoughts first. I'm not confident in this number due to the changes that were there that have happened at Bert Nash and just where they are. I did set aside some money in very much in the operating the behavioral sales tax operating fund to sort of continue the conversations about that. Just so we know that there is dollars that we want to focus on looking at the TRC and the funding that's needed for the TRC. But at this time, I just don't feel like we have a really solid grasp on this number.
I think we're about 6 weeks away from having better numbers.
I think probably within the next 6 weeks, we might see their board get a 2025 budget. That's a start. I don't have any numbers, any financials from Bert Nash that I can hang my hat on. And that's a really sticky place to be for such a big partner.
Agree, and that's what I put in my justification and my recommendations is that we do not have a 2025 budget, plus no audits. And I did not recommend the supplemental. And I also suggested for the crisis center operations that we need to reduce, a recommendation to reduce that budget as well, reduce but hold that funding, so that we can review 2025 budget and sit down at the table with Dr. Watkins as well as the endowment and the board and review the audit and just have a conversation regarding operations.
Can I ask for a clarification on audits? We have a 2022 audit from them is the most recent. Is that right? And I'm just looking at that in the administration drive. So do they not have a 2023 audit yet? Because most organizations won't have a 2024 yet. It's just, it's hard to get one before October, November.
Looks like we do have a 23 audit.
You have a 23. Okay, so they're reasonably current, they're current with audits then, if they have a 2023.
I think also what I'm hearing is just a desire to sit down and review financials
Oh, yeah.
with their outside firm. So while it may not be a full audit, there could be an opportunity to sit down and review financials.
We got 2 different groups working over there now. Who do we hire to do the annual audit? And SSC is doing remedial accounting work, right?
Their audit that the county pays for is by BT and Co. out of Topeka.
So we are waiting on 2 audits, correct? That's what I
Just the
thought.
24, just the 24 audit, which is probably on track,
Okay.
So what is the status of SS&C? What are they, do we know what they're contracted to do and what the timeline might be?
I don't have any specifics on that. I can ask Bert Nash to provide that, but I don't currently have any specifics on it.
I did not fund this for a couple main reasons. pretty much what's already been stated by fellow commissioners. I don't have anything that gives me confidence in where that number is coming from. I'm not clear about where their requests with KDADs at the state stand, and what impact that has or doesn't have. All the other financial uncertainty is certainly part of the equation, and not knowing how they arrived at those numbers and why the budget would balloon so much. It's changed a little bit each year so far. That this would be year 3 of funding for TRC operations specifically. And then will it be our contract with them for the TRC ends at the end of 26? Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah.
Bob? Okay. Okay, one more renewal.
For 2026.
For a 1-year renewal. So I just think there are a lot of moving parts there. And so to infuse, to almost double what, what we pay there, which would also wipe out 75% of our ongoing funding of the behavioral health fund. That piece of it is extremely significant to me. I don't believe that the TRC or Burt Nash and all of its services beyond the TRC are what that fund is meant to be primarily dedicated. It already is primarily dedicated to many of the services that Burt Nash operates, and to sort of almost wipe out the rest of our operating capacity for that operation doesn't make any sense to me, especially when we have all the outstanding questions that we do about what their 2025 budget looks like, what their 24 and 23 audit might show us, and what some potential investments in further financial review that the county, the county is already in conversations with Burt Nash leadership about that, and how to be helpful and supportive in that process. And that's how I want to be a supportive partner, is figuring it out together. But that doesn't, to me, look like infusing them with cash right now, and almost doubling the budget on the TRC operation in just year 3 with a lot of unanswered questions otherwise. So I'm not supportive of this request in particular. And there are a couple other requests from them that are further down our list to discuss. And they're a little bit different than this one. I'd be open to the idea of some potential set aside, but I just don't know how to arrive at a number for that one in particular. I just feel like there's so much more to unpack and understand about where they're at, to know how we might be helpful on a cash flow basis versus a, significant funder and supportive partner in the process of unpacking how we got here, how they got here, and how we can support them in shoring it up and moving forward.
Quick question, Sarah, if Burt Nash is under contract to run the TRC through 26, is that right?
They have a 90-day out and we have a 90-day out.
Right. And so that's part of where I wanted to hold, are we ready to bring in, if they have a 90-day out and they're looking at this and saying, well, we think we need these dollars to make this work, we would have to find someone else to operate the TRC within 90 days. And so while I recognize that, I think that I don't have any trust in this number, to be honest with you. I did want to set aside a little bit of money in our operating funds to see if we could come to an understanding of what the actual costs were. I also want to make sure that that KDADS is involved, and that any KDADS money that is coming on behalf of the TRC is held by the county, and would enter into that equation.
So I didn't tackle Bert Nash's requests kind of separately and in silos because for just those reasons, we don't have a full understanding of any of the financial pieces that they've offered us. So instead, I looked at kind of how we were talking about previously with headquarters, like what's the pool of funding that we would set aside for their stability once we had some better understanding of it. And maybe what that means is, being a party to that contract for SS&C so that we're getting the information as they're getting information. I'm not sure what that looks like. So like how things, scored and rated here, it depends on kind of what line I put it on. But I had one number and it was not based on a whole lot yet. So for discussion, but that's how I tackled all of the Bert Nash requests together.
Okay, commissioners, so we need to end up with something here. It doesn't sound like any of us are comfortable with the 1.2 million, or there's not consensus for the $1.2 million number. We can set some money aside. We can just not fund it at all. I sort of feel like there was some, Commissioner Willie, I heard you say you had set some money aside, but for all, sort of all together.
Yeah, and that gets complicated because we have a specific contract for the TRC. So, going back a year ago at this time, and they asked for 1.6, that was, and in their budget, in my budget book from last year, it says, we don't anticipate any operational changes. And so we hung our hat on that. We gave them what was asked for. And then, 6 months later, they came back and said, we're rough numbers, $1.5 million behind our budget. Well, that's not the budget you gave us. That's a different budget. And when I asked, well, how much are you actually behind cash wise? And the answer was 500,000. So they'd added so many positions, but many of those I believe weren't filled. They were just hanging out in their budget. So like that gap in the budget didn't impress me as being our responsibility whatsoever. But that they were behind 500,000 in total operational net. Even that, because the numbers in the budgets that they submitted to us have changed so much, it's really hard to know where that stands and if that's the right operational level there. And that's not necessarily for us to decide, but certainly for us to be in the conversation about, since we're expected to be a funding partner. So yeah, I guess we have to separate those two. I just hadn't.
Well, let me notice this on our deliberation sheet here. There were 3 votes for some, or 3 identified for some sort of support for TRC supplemental funding. And there were 2 votes for the gap funding for behavioral health program, that the sliding scale essentially is what that is. There was not 2 votes for the gap funding for Bert Nash.
I put mine on a different line. I wouldn't necessarily go on the how many votes. It depends on how Brooke took my notes and
Okay.
retranslated them.
Yeah, I would also just I don't think that the number represents votes. I see
Yeah,
the
not
note
votes,
says,
yeah.
or I mean, even support. It's interest in partial funding at various levels and interest in reduction. So I heard Commissioner Anderson talk about a reduction rather than, and that would leave 2 commissioners who indicated interest in partial funding.
Yeah, and so even on my worksheet, it might have appeared confusing because I did, in my notes section, I did not fund the supplemental. And I made a reduction. I recommended a reduction in the 2026 crisis center operations for the TRC.
Commissioner Anderson, can I ask you a little bit about that?
Mhm.
We have a contract with Bert Nash through 2026.
Okay.
If we cut the funding that we have with them, is that a violation of our contract?
And so my recommendation in my notes was I recommended a cut that we hold so that we could deliberate with the board and Dr. Watkins to better understand where better understand where they're currently going and to actually review the budget and outstanding audits, if we have outstanding audits from 23 and 24, being that we have 2 audits that I'm now hearing that are going to be coming forward, so that we can get a better handle on the TRC and the crisis center operations. So it's not necessarily a full cut, but it's let's hold those dollars so that we can really understand what's actually transpiring at the TRC
So let's,
in 2026.
commissioners, is there support for cutting the base budget for the TRC for Bert Nash? I hear one commissioner who's interested in that. Is there anyone else? No. Okay, so I'm not seeing that. So we can hold the base budget there. Then we need to decide if we're going to set money aside for their supplemental request. And Commissioner Anderson, maybe have some of those conversations around their supplemental request. And if there is dollars that we want to do that, how much is that? I heard Commissioner Willie sort of lumping some things in, and I don't know that I got a number out of you.
You did not.
Okay, just checking my listening skills. And so we either need to decide not to fund this, commissioners, or we need to decide how much we want to set aside for it. If somebody wants to lump those in together, like, we'd also need a number for that. I will tell you what I just did in my budget. And it probably doesn't make it any easier, was I set aside in our behavioral health sales tax fund $1 million so that we could sort of talk about that group. And I don't know how I decided $1 million. I think I added some things up and divided it in half or something like that. But I was just trying to get a number that I could bring forward that I wanted to say, I don't want us, because we have lots of things that are asking for dollars in the mental health sales tax. If we pick away at that, we won't hold that $1 million, and we could get down to zero in our operating fund, as we talked about in our first set of deliberations.
This $1 million, I won't tag onto the number so much, but are you talking about specifically for the TRC, or are you talking about Bert Nash as a whole? So you're combining these things also.
Yes, I was combining them
Right.
also. That's why I said I don't think this makes it any easier. And I think there are some other things I wanted to see where some other things shook out down the list, and so may have included them. I see there wasn't support for them, so I'm not including them in our discussion.
Commissioners, I want to note that so far in your deliberations, you've already allocated $672,152 of the behavioral health sales tax. So
In ongoing
in
operating capacity.
ongoing support,
Out of 6 million?
1.6.
0.6. That's
So
where I'm coming
To
from.
me, you're down to about $1 million.
Yeah.
I don't think we have enough information to do too much of anything at this point. Philosophically, we need to decide if we're partnering with Bert Nash or if they are a contractor to us.
I feel committed to the health and stability of Bert Nash. I think they're very important to our community as a whole. They're not the only piece of our crisis service ecosystem, but they're a big part. I want to see them stable. I want to see them healthy. I want to be thought of as a partner to them, and for them as a partner to us. We would still have a contract, so they would be contractors in that regard. But I really think that relationship has a lot of work to do, and I think that we're on a positive track with that. So I also lumped these things together, and I'm in the ballpark, about in the ballpark with you for a dollar amount, but how that gets translated into the TRC versus other operating, I'm struggling with that.
So since this doesn't affect the mill levy, we don't have to decide before Thursday, do we?
We typically like to decide how we do our mental health sales tax, so we have a budget for 2027. That doesn't mean, and because we
26.
want to, thank you, 26. And that doesn't, it also keeps us from having multiple requests come throughout the year as if it holds a budget.
I'm very comfortable to have one budget process for the county and we push on through, even though we're putting a lot of things in the parking lot for the rest of our fall work. I think it helps us to have a solid set of numbers to move forward. And that's how I think we owe it to the staff to not drag it out. Budget season starts in March.
When I review the ongoing recommended budget for Bert Nash, they're already receiving millions. I mean, a lot of money. So setting aside $1 million to have a conversation, I think is a lot of money.
I wasn't saying it was specifically for Bert Nash.
Oh, okay.
I was saying I didn't want to dig so deep into our mental health care, what I consider the operating side of the mental health sales tax, that if we fund so many things, we would be so low, you know, that makes me really nervous. I mean,
Okay. So what do we, okay, so say a little bit more, because I guess I thought it was for Bert Nash.
Are you making a distinction that you think $1 million set aside for TRC operations potentially, or it?
well, yeah. And as I say it out loud, I also recognize we need to set a budget for an organization. And we've talked here about how to sort of determine, you know, what the possibility is that they're working for. I will say that I think operating the crisis center, the TRC, is more expensive. I was frankly shocked when they came to us with the first number that they had, that that's what it would cost. And they said they could do it based on the state funding they would get. Happy it's given us the ability to do a lot of other things, but seeing an increase in their price is not really surprising to me. The acuity levels that we're seeing at the TRC doesn't shock me. We've also seen since that time a significant increase in wages across the board, not just there, but also the demand for people working in mental health fields has really increased the cost of those people working in those fields. So I'm not surprised that that number is there. I have a much harder time with the $500,000 request. That's down lower on the list than I do this. But I think we need to set aside some money knowing that the TRC is going to be more expensive. I didn't put it towards something, but as I'm going through the list, some of the things I was thinking about didn't even get support, and that's fine. But I'm okay saying it's just for TRC. I feel like I was sort of circular there, but that's the way of saying an answer to your question.
I'd be cautious a little bit of saying like some of the things that you put on your line items didn't get support because they may be on somebody else's different line. So I'd say don't bury any discussion about this for that reason. That's fair.
Commissioners, I do think if it was $1 million in potential ongoing funding for crisis system support, you know, it wouldn't have to be, you know, that puts partners on notice that it's not necessarily obligated towards them, but that it's about that. I guess I'd also mention, and Bob and I talked about this, that, you know, the existing, I think the 3.1 in KDAD's funding, you know, we don't have an ability, Bob, you can come forward if you want. We don't really have an ability to control that. That's something I'd like to have conversations with KDADs about and Bert Nash about, but I'm also, I guess I'd like to put at some level all of Bert Nash funding. You know, we have a lot of work to do before we would sign a 2026 operating agreement. And that's going to happen regardless. I like this idea of as soon as physically and possible, a meeting with their board on their financial status. That would help inform that. I think that could hopefully happen in this quarter. But we have a lot of work to do before I'd be comfortable executing any agreement for 2026. Is that, I mean, say more about what you were thinking about the KDAD's conversation, Bob.
This is the first year that the $3.1 million that came from KDADS, which the county negotiated with KDADS for the operation of the TRC. This is the first year that those dollars went directly to Bird Nash. As I listen to the conversation and we look at what we do know, we don't have confidence in how the numbers play themselves out, but we do have confidence that Bird Nash has made commitment to staff, and there's some fixed cost in terms of commitment that they've made despite the fact that they have this gap. So that's a dilemma. I also think that as Bert Nash is doing and asking SSC to come in and look at financial operations of the organization overall, TRC is 25% of the Bert Nash Center in terms of how it falls into the CCBHC model. And I think it would be wise to consider some focused work also specifically on this piece of the operation. And so, an operational review from an outside source that makes recommendations about how to trim, compact this budget, how to staff more efficiently, more effectively, and or to understand, the TRC staff, Ryan Storch, they make a compelling argument about the level of acuity that we are saying yes to in that facility is it creates substantial requirements that we didn't anticipate would happen in that way. So I think we need to be, I think the biggest thing is to get some outside expertise to look at what's happening and to make recommendations to the folks that are running it about how they could run it more efficiently, more effectively, or what other options. I think that would also put us in a good situation for continued conversation with KDADS based on what we learn from that type of review.
I agree. I think that the crisis center is going to cost more to the county than the 1.6, and that we need to hold capacity for that. We have, it's a project I think the county feels a lot of dedication towards and ownership of. I want to make sure that that is able to be healthy. I just want to know what those staffing models are and what the future of that would be, and kind of have some guarantees that we're dialing in on something and not just continually. Not every problem is fixed with personnel. Not every problem is fixed with money. Like what are the other issues?
Well, and each of these pieces affect this CCBHC model. So if TRC is smaller, that affects the cost report, that affects the PPS rate. And that is true across the organization with all of these components of what, the model is, as Bert Nash told us, that CCBHC should pay for 60% of a thing, and there's a need for finding the other 40%. That's not how it's played itself out. CCBHC has paid for 53% of a thing. 7% of a $41 million operating budget is a large chunk of money, far more than what you could give through the behavioral health sales tax. If you gave them all of it, you'd still have a $3.6 million gap at this moment.
Well, I was just going to say, down the road, after the experts come in, we may have to look at the acuity level that we accept at the TRC. 2 weeks ago, 4 employees went to the hospital. 5 weeks ago, a staff member got their nose broken by a patient. Some of these people that we accept are extremely violent.
Okay. So Sarah, I heard you say setting a million for and terming it as a crisis. It's a crisis as mental health crisis support, right?
Yeah,
Is that
1 million for ongoing crisis system operations.
do we have
And then,
consensus on that, commissioners, or is there anyone who that?
but also tied with an outside review of the TRC in conversations with KDADS on the status of the KDADS funding.
Is that a separate conversation then about Bert Nash's financial stability and any role we play there?
And then an additional, try to, as soon as feasibly possible, conversation with Bert Nash and their board on their current financials.
I mean, is there a dollar amount that we're looking for that that's separate from what you suggested?
That's not what I'm hearing. And what I also heard is that, I mean, a full review and opportunity to meet with Bert Nash board and look at the full, is it SS&C? Make sure I get that right. That all of that is going to happen irregardless of any allocations. Any supplemental requests we may or may not support, right? Because we have allocated dollars to them for various programs, including the TRC, that's going to happen before executing 2026 contracts, period, irregardless of whatever's set aside. So that's what my takeaway from the conversation is. And
So does that mean not funding any supplemental requests for Bert Nash operations outside of the TRC? Is that what I'm hearing?
I saw it as crisis system operations, so I wasn't limiting it that closely, Commissioner. I think but it does give a ballpark in which we can work in, and I think then we can come back to you with better recommendations. I'd rather not tie your hands too much, but I do really appreciate the Commissioner's understanding that, you know, having some guardrails on what we're talking about is helpful for staff so that, I mean, we could be inundated with requests constantly from people asking us, you know, for more funds if we don't have some guardrails on it.
The wording there doesn't give you much for guardrails. Are you still worried that is what you're going to get?
I'm comfortable with this. I think we could, you know, because commissioners are indicating support for ongoing conversations with Bert Nash and on the operating and crisis system. And you've talked about you're reserving funds for ongoing support. Doesn't mean you're going to spend it all. And that's how I would approach this conversation is that we're going to be very austere and judicious with what we bring forward to you as recommendations, because that's what we do all the time. But this is not open season on the Behavioral Health Fund and asking for requests for funding.
So tying back to the headquarters conversation where we set aside one-time dollars for a conversation around stability, helping with stability of that organization, whether that happens or not, there's lots of conversations to happen. But I don't hear us then saying the same thing for Bert Nash out of one-time dollars. Is that where we stand? Because I think it's that parallel conversation that we started with, I think is worth pursuing.
I guess I'd like to, I mean, if you're asking for my recommendation, which I'm not sure you are, I would say that having a door open for how did we phrase it? What did you call it, Commissioner Reed? For headquarters, you called the funding, you used a word that I wanted to write down. Not subsistent?
solvency?
Solvency.
Okay.
So I think we could open a door for 2025 solvency conversations with Bert Nash from one-time funds. But in my view, by keeping this 1 million, I mean, to me, this 1 million for ongoing crisis system operations could potentially support headquarters in 2026 or 2027. You've kept it general enough. And frankly, from what I can tell in the math, you've obligated the Behavioral Health Fund. It's obligated for ongoing expense now. Now this million may not manifest itself, but right now you're not entertaining additional requests until we can get some more things figured out. That's how I interpret where you are. But to go back to yours, I think you could add to that discussion that you would entertain conversations about 2025 solvency funds in addition to this.
And
if that's what the commission wanted to do.
And I think that's the conversation I'm wanting to have. What I want to be really clear on is that using one-time dollars to fill operating gaps is not of interest of mine. I think they have a lot to do to figure out what programs are working, what programs can they pay for, what else needs to happen in their model. But I'm thinking in terms of, I don't think of that one-time, the fund balance as for strictly capital requests either. I think of it as things that create stability that then make them make organizations able to function more efficiently down the road. Sometimes that's buildings, sometimes it's something like this. And I guess I'm thinking of the SS&C conversation, like getting them back on track. But I definitely don't want to be talking about holding one-time funds open to help offset operating gaps, which is what they had come and what they came asking for earlier in the year.
Do you want me to repeat it so the commissioners can determine if they're supportive?
Yeah, we sort of got cloudy there at the end.
Yeah.
Could you just?
So, a meeting in hopefully the third quarter of 2025 to review financials with the Bert Nash Board to inform conversations for the 2026 operating agreement. $1 million set aside for ongoing crisis system support starting in 2026. Any funding for Bert Nash in 2026 is tied to an outside review of the TRC, as well as conversations with KDADs about the status of their funding for 2026 and how it's obligated. And also holding possibility for 2025 solvency funds for a proposal to be prepared by staff and the Bert Nash Board and brought before the Board of County Commissioners for consideration.
And that last bit, I think that's what you're wanting us to talk about now. Is there a dollar amount that we'd put on one-time funds that could be set aside to help us solve?
Yeah, that's where I was going. That's where I said.
If you
got
want to put
cloudy.
a,
Yeah, if we wanted to
put a ballpark on that, that'd be great.
we did 300,000 for headquarters. What do we think this number is?
I have no idea.
And commissioners, I do think, I think we're potentially closer to $500,000.
Yeah.
If you're looking at paying for the contract of SS&C, a search firm, and any other sort of solvency measures that would need to be taken. That'd be, yeah. And that's my recommendation. It would be my recommendation at this point.
I think 500,000 would be okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Enthusiastic answer for you. And I don't know that we, if we flesh out those conversations through the year, I don't know that we would be open to paying the entirety of any of those things you talked about. I think it would be a conversation with their board about how are they stepping up and what's changing with the way they view their role in governance.
And I want to point out, Bob, I heard what you added there. I think commissioners have real concerns about paying for operating gaps. So I'm not sure that those funds could be used for operating gaps.
No, what I meant was the operational review.
Oh,
There
the
would be
operational
cost
review.
involved in
Yes,
that.
the cost of an operational review of the TRC would be included in that amount. Yes.
So then if we allocate another $500,000 for solvency, have I also heard that the remainder of the supplemental requests from Bert Nash, we're not looking at the remainder of those? Is that what, those have not been funded? Is that correct?
Correct. I would view this 500,000 as one-time
Okay.
funding and that you've reserved $1 million ongoing for crisis system support and operations. So to me, you've obligated the behavioral health fund.
Okay.
Bob, you mentioned that review would cost.
If we have to,
If we were bringing in outside expertise to do an operational review of the TRC,
I
there would be
thought we
cost
could get that for
associated with it.
free, though.
we don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
at this point.
And Bert Nash has not reached out to find whether that is possible. There's a CCBHC Technical Assistance Center. You
Yeah.
could make a request of that. There's additional work that could be done to look at specifically an operational review with expertise on running crisis centers, not CCBHC.
I just want to keep all our options open at this point.
Sarah, I want to clarify something you said. You said we have exhausted our mental health sales tax. Y- y- Operations,
Operational
operations
Ongoing
capacity.
operational capacity.
We could move any of those things to our general fund ad valorem, right?
Absolutely.
We don't, there isn't a set amount that's how much we need to spend. And we do use general fund now for mental health, behavioral health costs.
Agreed. I just didn't want commissioners to think that was an unending font of money to pay for whatever you wanted to. At this point, I feel like the revenue is allocated. The ongoing revenue is allocated with this $1 million.
That's what I was thinking about last night and revisiting what we had discussed so far, and that I would like to, after we finish getting through the list, revisit the things that we allocated mental health ongoing dollars to, and get in the weeds about that a little bit more, because we have at this point now, this discussion tapped out that ongoing capacity, and I want to revisit that before we wrap up.
And commissioners, every year this changes a little bit, additional needs in an area, and other needs are opened up. So I'm, it's not necessarily locked. It's not locked or static, but from our perspective, and you can obviously go back and we can review what you put towards the behavioral health fund earlier in these discussions, and you could decide if you want to keep it there or put it back in the general fund.
So we can either, if we wanted to, we could move partners from behavioral health into general fund. But what we typically have done is made an allocation from the general fund to behavioral health and kept all of those partners together, right?
You can do it either way, as long as I would say it's an eligible expense. If you're going to move things into the behavioral health fund, it should be aligned with that purpose. But the general fund is general. So the general fund can also pay for behavioral health and did for decades.
I'm going to recommend, commissioners, unless there's anything else on this, that we take a little bit of a break. We go down a different path here after it coming up here next. So till 10:40 will give us about 13 minutes. Sound good? All right, we'll be back then. Thank you, everybody. Okay, commissioners, we're back. We are down to the items that had a consensus value, not votes, a consensus value of 2. And the first one is for a 0.4 FTE assistant attorney 3 position and moving that to full time, and it's 130,000. I guess the best way to move forward on these things is if you can get another commissioner to go along with you. If you were the 2 that said you really wanted to do this, and you can get another commissioner to go along, that might be. There was some also partial funding and various levels of funding. So I'll just open that up to the commission to discuss.
It wasn't me.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
It wasn't you to fund, is that what you're stating?
Correct. Sorry to be cheeky about it.
Yeah.
I didn't include this on my budget worksheet, so I don't have any further thoughts to share, really.
I did fund the attorney position. Try to look at which one this is.
It's the second line
Yep.
on the worksheet that we were working from, which if that helps anybody.
I funded all of these that were brought before us at full levels. to include the legal position, the eviction resolution position, as well as the 6 panel attorneys for sync.
Okay, so we already talked about the sync panel attorneys, that we did that yesterday, and I believe that we landed on, there's consensus to fund that fully. The eviction resolution is the next line we're gonna talk about, but so the DA's office did have 2 requests. I only see one line here noted, which is the one for the assistant attorney. They also asked for a legal assistant. But that's not included on here, so it sounds like I just wanted to clarify, since you said you funded them all, that you, for the DA's office, you just mean the assistant attorney request. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any more thoughts you want to share about why?
I just felt that they made a really good case for their need for the position. And yeah, just really wanted to ensure that they actually had the support that they actually needed to do the work. When I actually think about the work that they actually perform over there at the court. And this is the first year for Loomis actually standing up the work overall and the support that he's actually asking for. He spoke a lot around a desire to ensure that the families are supported, that he talked a lot around well-being. I mean, a lot of the questions that I focused on were around health and well-being, right? And ensuring that the mental health of those that they actually serve are improved. And he talked a lot around caseload and the fact that some of the cases they were having to close and send to other counties because they just did not have the capacity to serve. And for me, that made a compelling case.
I think I said this in our hearings and I think I worry when elected officials start to bring to us individual line item requests. I would, unless it's for a specific project, if it was for a specific initiative that I think they need to determine how best to use their budget that we allocate to them. If he wants to, I feel like if the DA feels like this is an important position, wants to move around funding to make this work, make it work.
I actually feel really differently about it.
Yeah.
I like that everybody works through the process, and like the sheriff often is asking for positions to be added and such. And yeah, they have some leeway over their budget, but I didn't take it in that regard. I'm glad to be in those conversations and don't want that part to change. I only flagged positions for funding that were directly related to the new buildings. That was kind of my framework across it, because I'm really dicey about adding positions ever. And so I'm always a little stingy with that, but the ones that I found compelling were specifically related to the new buildings.
Okay. I feel like on these, if we don't have any sort of move, we should just let these go. I'm not feeling a strong push here, or I'm not hearing 2 people advocate strongly to the other 3. So I'm going to move on from this one, and we're not going to fund it. Okay. We'll go on to the next one, which is a 0.5 FTE eviction resolution coordinator, which is now currently 0.5, and this would take it to full time, and it's for 33,044. And we again had interest in partial funding or various levels.
I also funded this one. When we think about eviction resolution and ensuring that we don't have more individuals who are homeless, I did feel like this is much needed.
I was the second culprit, and for much the same reasons.
I value the work and the conversation around it. I didn't fund it, and based on this came to us as a grant, and don't always want to, I don't want to be backed into things just because grant funding goes away. And that was kind of the nature of the quest here. I didn't have a full understanding of what the position has brought to us during the time that it's been here. Like if you start in on a grant funded position or program, like that's your time to make a really strong case for why this should have ongoing funding. And I wasn't quite there with this. I do think we'll continue to have conversations around the county's role and the court's role in eviction proceedings. I think those are big conversations. I didn't see all of that happening within this line. If there's interest in setting aside dollars for a different way to look at that, that's maybe not even this year's problem.
I think for me, I'm not seeing the sort of outcomes and results that compel me to want to continue funding it, and I'm not sure about what the future funding of the position might look like, right? As I understand it, this request is coming to us for another match because the grant was extended for an additional year, but we don't know what might happen after that. And it doesn't make much sense to me. I'm not in a position of wanting to infuse more dollars there right now, not knowing that it could or would be sustained past that grant cycle. And I'm not convinced that the impact has been significant enough that the county would be, that the commission would be interested in supporting that position full time. I think that that's a thought that the district court can certainly consider even without the county commission's investment. I share your concern, Commissioner Anderson. I think all commissioners here probably do share the concern that we've got to look at prevention of homelessness from a variety of angles and prevention of evictions and harm reduction around evictions is a significant issue that I care deeply about. And I believe there are other strategies, to Commissioner Rowley's point, for us to unpack further, get more information about as a whole commission. And I would like to spend time doing that this year and see what opportunities are in front of us for other strategies to address that. I feel like this is creating some efficiencies for the court. And I'm glad that a practice has been developed that there's a regular routine review of sort of the stagnant filings and dismissals of those filings. But I'm just not convinced that that progress is significant enough in moving the needle on really curbing eviction activity and making sure that we have better systems around how to strategize around that. And it's tricky because the court has a really specific role. So they do have to be really careful about how they interact with folks. And anyway, I just think those are all my reasons. It's a tough one for me because I really supportive of this idea from the get-go. I just don't think that now with a couple of years that it has moved the needle on a prevention side that I would hope to affect. And so I think that the conversation comes back to the county commission about how do we look at this differently moving forward. And then just the context of it being a match for grant funds that are going to go away in a year. I think I'm just ready to not fund it anymore now.
I didn't fund this, but I put 40,000 into the commissioner's contingency budget to talk about evictions and sort of what is our role going forward there. We have Kansas Holistic Defenders down the list. There seem to be some overlap in services there when it comes to evictions. I'll admit I may not be understanding the complexity of all that to the level that I want to yet. But I wanted to hold some space as we talk about how we can address evictions for this may stay as a part-time position, and there may be other grant dollars that we are just looking at the system as a whole. I have some questions when we get down to Kansas Holistic Defenders about how we fund that and what we're doing there. And so I just thought that would be a good place to have that conversation and hold that 40,000 over there.
I didn't fund it, but that is interesting to me.
Well, I think we're done on this. Why don't we move to?
So, well, I don't have clarity. So do we have 40,000? I have two commissioners interested in holding $40,000 in the commissioner's budget to talk about eviction. And
Well, I think you wanted to talk about holistic defenders in conjunction with this, right?
Well, it just can't, my point was that what I heard at our hearings was that Kansas Holistic Defenders has a grant for evictions, and I want to understand how that dovetails, whether, the courts have to, as Commissioner Reed said, have to be very careful in how they represent. Is it better to maybe have some sort of work being done by Kansas Holistic Defenders to represent those who are having I don't know, and I'm really feeling very much on a light limb right now in this, but I just wanted to set some dollars aside to be thinking about evictions, thinking about how Kansas Holistic Defenders plays into it, maybe not at all, thinking about this position. I know that there's been some interest in right to counsel. And so that was another reason to hold those dollars there, to have a deeper discussion and to maybe pilot some ideas.
I am supportive of a set aside. I mean, I think to Commissioner Dorsey's point, like we don't have consensus on funding the eviction resolution coordinator, so that's not included. And I'm open to a set aside amount too. It's just a separate piece of the conversation. And I don't, given the context of Kansas Holistic Defenders request, I don't think we should necessarily tie them together in this conversation. But to be clear, like if we move on from the line that we just talked about, I guess first get consensus for staff about the set aside amount, and then move on to the next line.
are you all?
Are we okay setting aside 40,000 in the commissioner's budget for eviction discussion?
The commissioner's budget, do you mean that?
Funding contingency line.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
think
I'm
we
good
have
with setting it
consensus.
aside for eviction resolution.
Got it.
Okay, Heritage Events and Celebrations Fund, 20,000.
Okay, that was me. I always really appreciate our heritage work that the county is invested in partners, but I also, if you're wanting a hard sell for this 20 grand, I don't have it. Like I went both ways on it and went ahead and flagged it in. It's a relatively minor amount of dollars that kind of support other community work. Like it'll always be a minority funder within, I think, those heritage things, but I'm comfortable either way. That sounds like a no.
I'm not hearing a hard sell from anybody on this one. Okay, we're moving on. One FTE PC specialist. I think this is the IT position.
Okay, that was me. And we talked about these separately, but I kind of wanted to talk about them together, like where the IT needs are for specifically the new buildings and transitioning into the new buildings, which it's one thing to maintain those systems, but it's another thing for us to get there. So I had funded both an IT position at the sheriff's department and this one, this is the sheriff's.
And we did decide to fund one, was that right, of the IT positions?
Correct. Yeah, we're right now including one of the IT, it's a analyst
Analyst.
in the final budget at this time.
But yeah, the part-time,
Be a second, they had a part-time position built in by me. You all have put in one more. This would be the 2.5. This would be the last 1.0 FTE in the 2.5 request. Does that make sense?
yeah, there,
Yeah. I
Yeah, there
mean,
were two and
there's-
a half positions requested. The part-time position was written into Sarah's version of the budget, and I wrote in the IT analyst position.
And Commissioner Anderson expressed earlier that she put all the positions in, so I assume that's where the two votes came from.
Correct.
I'm still comfortable with 1.5.
How do you have a half?
Well, 0.5, it's a 20-hour week position.
So it's a part-time,
Yep. We currently have a part-time position, FTE, and this would be this person just wants to work 20 hours. They may have
okay.
something else they like to do and for our organization, you can get benefits at 20 hours.
So Commissioner Kelly, did you say you do want to fund this position? That would be 1.5, or are you counting the sheriff's office position and the IT halftime?
I'm just staying with the information technology positions. I thought we fund the analyst? I thought you said we funded the analyst. So
Funded the
for
analyst.
the IT department, we funded 1.5 positions.
Plus then an additional one, yes,
One
we
for the
did.
Sheriff.
And then an additional position for the sheriff.
Commissioner Willie, if think I might track what you're confused by. So there was a 0.5 position included by staff already. And we yesterday decided to add the one analyst. So Commissioner Kelly is getting 1.5 is being included, even though the total request was 2.5 positions if you total up the 3 requests.
I got it. I did not fund the specialist position, which is the one that we're up to here.
Okay, I see.
I was speaking you to the wrong one, so
I see.
did
Got it.
not fund that one.
All right, so we don't have consensus. We're moving on.
I appreciate everybody walking through that clarity with
No,
me.
Okay, we're moving on. First responders and first responders RIT. And Commissioner Willie, I think this is you.
I did flag those, but I don't have anything that is especially going to move us forward on those conversations. I'd say the status quo for now, and then as we have other conversations about fire, EMS across the board, we may come back and revisit this next year.
Just for clarity's sake, so the first responders budget pays for a small stipend, a per call stipend for the volunteer fire departments. So
Just on medical calls.
I'm getting there. Yes, Consolidated Fire 1, District 2 and District 3, and the city of Baldwin City and the city of Eudora for just EMS calls. And so we pay a per call stipend for those calls. We also pay for training. If folks are interested in becoming certified EMT, and they pass their courses, we will reimburse them for their courses. That's what hits that budget. And then the first responder writ line was a specific project that was initiated probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, not that long, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 9, to have all of the volunteer departments work together on a rapid intervention team. That's what RIT stands for. And basically this is an allocation for equipment. That RIT team is currently not active. It was included in the recommendations for CFD1 and the ESCI report that you all heard a few weeks ago to get that reactivated. At the end of the year, if there's nothing spent out of this line item, we transfer the balance to our equipment reserve. So the county's holding those funds. They are available if that team gets active and needs to purchase more equipment. And it's a very small equipment reserve balance at this point. I think it's like $15,000. That we're holding.
And I did, hearing what I heard from that report, I did add dollars from the commissioner budget to the RIT line because I heard that they needed more funding to do the work that they actually do. So I upped their budget from the commissioner line by 25,000. And then for the first responder budget, I also added dollars, but I was not aware that that is not a budget that you add dollars to because it's a special taxing district.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Anderson was hoping to add dollars to that budget that would then go to CFD1. But because CFD1 is a separate taxing district, I can't move money that way between the two. So I think that was kind of just a clarifying
Correct.
thing that Commissioner Anderson wanted. So really, it only got one vote.
Correct, yeah. So that'll be a conversation for after budget is what Sarah told me.
So the next one would then be the Baldwin Chamber ongoing operational funding.
That is one that I funded. So I did think, after conversation with Dana, that she did make a good, ask for economic development. If this is their, I believe it's their first request in a little while, from the chamber. I do think that they still have some work to do, in making a proposal. And I do realize that the county has moved to funding, EDCs versus local chambers. But the Baldwin Chamber is attempting to, build up their economic base and to move in a direction, to really identify good opportunities to bring community members, but to bring tourism, to Baldwin and to really create some opportunities, for partners to really understand what they do and how to engage. And so I think 10,000 is a good start, for them to identify something that they can do together. And so I went ahead and funded this.
Commissioner Anderson, I appreciate you continuing to speak. And Commissioner Willie, I'm curious if the other person who included it on their line has any additional thoughts they want to share. Okay.
Okay. I think we'll let that one go. Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. The next one would be the EDC of Douglas County. And there were various cuts at different levels.
I had a question on that. There's only 2 listed. Did the other 3 have full funding?
Yeah, I would expect from that would be the base funding, was what the other 3 were for. Talking about EDC. So there was EDC didn't have a supplemental request. So in our budget is there what we would call base funding, right? And so we must have had 2 commissioners checking with Brooke who wanted to reduce that amount of base funding.
I was one of them. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm still have concerns that EDC is not separated enough from the Lawrence Chamber. And you would know more about that than I do.
Did you have a funding suggestion?
What did I do? I think I reduced it 50,000 to 150 or 155. What is it? 210? 205.
And I mentioned my cut yesterday, in relation to KUIP, which, was 75, because I desire a cohesive plan between both entities when we take a look at the startups, at KU Innovation Park, and for, the EDC and KU Innovation Park to work together to identify a plan for either payments in lieu of taxes pilots, for those entities that have been there for 5 years or longer, to either be paying taxes and or to identify those ones that can actually move off of Innovation Park, that don't have businesses that really need to be there, right? For wet labs or science and technology that can actually move out into the county, and start paying taxes for 5 years or longer because they have been at Innovation Park for 5 years. Because EDC is tasked with really that economic plan, I do believe that they should be working with KU Innovation Park to develop that plan. And so that's why I also cut them. I cut them at the same level, so that it would be an equitable cut. And so that's why I made it a fairly fair cut, I felt.
And what was that amount? I don't remember.
I apologize, 75 for both entities.
I would, I have seen some response from the Economic Development Corporation. We have to, I think it's important to remember what the EDC was founded to do. And I think this commission has really asked them to be something different than that, to really be sort of our overall hub for economic development for Douglas County. They've changed their bylaws. They have a set of goals. KUIP does sit on the EDC board. However, they're a non-voting member of that board. And so while I recognize Commissioner Anderson, your hope is that the EDC would sort of push what I think I hear you saying, push KUIP to be more responsive to our requests. I feel like the EDC board has been responsive to our requests. The new bylaws do include a voting member. Whoever the county commission determines is their representative becomes a voting member. The city, which also contributes to the EDC, also has become a voting member. Those are changes that I think, since I've been on the commission, we've been asking for. KUIP, I feel, has not been responsive to the changes that we've been asking for. And so I see them very differently. I do think EDC has work to do, but I think that work is primarily because we have tasked them with doing something very different than what we expected them to be in the past, which was sort of a private entity that could negotiate land deals for economic development on behalf of the city, the county, and our economic development partners.
Yeah, I appreciate both your concerns and, I mean, Commissioner Dorsey, I tend to agree. There's still some cloudiness, and lack of clarity about that separation, but I do think we've seen progress. So to Commissioner Kelly's point, the questions that we've been asking, discussions we've been having approximately this time of year after year for the past few years, there has been some progress and evolution and a little bit more clarity. I still think that there's a little bit of fog there, to be honest. But the adopting new bylaws and making some significant changes there, having a request that's coming from EDC and not from the chamber, and staff working to start to really separate out what those financials are differently. Those are all factors for me in supporting the request as is, though I have been in a position in recent years interested in potentially cutting them, but the fact that there's been some responsiveness and movement, I have a lot of confidence in the chair of the EDC currently, and that I'm hopeful that with the new bylaws and the sort of structured goals, that EDC board as a whole, and especially, I think they're calling it their executive leadership team, can really, make a lot of the changes that manifest a lot of the changes and challenges that sort of Douglas County has been, I think, asking for in recent years. So I'm happy with the progress. I think it's something we still, keep our eye on, and it'll continue to be a conversation in this room amongst us.
One clarification, the way I read these bylaws, there's only one class of membership and they can all vote.
There are without going into too deep a dive on the bylaw, there are ex officio members who are appointed because of their position, who do not have an opportunity to vote. So for example, our county administrator is in an ex officio position, city manager, there's someone from the Baldwin Chamber, I believe, is an ex officio. They cannot vote. Members, there are two levels. There are members and directors, and you are correct that all of the members are directors. We've had a lot of conversations about that, and they do all vote. But there are positions that are attending meetings for their technical expertise, but are not voting members.
I supported the base funding. I just want to make sure that we clarify, I want to continue to see engagement and I want to continue to see progress and hearing from us. So I think it's a work in progress and I kept the funding there.
Not hearing movement on that one, so we'll go on to the next one. This was federal funding TFAP cut gap. Just food. Thank you. We had 2 commissioners in the consensus value. Give a little chance, sir.
I said, excuse me, I supported the additional funding to Just Foods.
I didn't, and because they've had such a large fund balance and year after year, we've asked them, what's the plan for that fund balance? And one of the questions that was specifically asked this time is, do you have a plan to buy more food with the fund balance or to make up some of that gap with the fund balance? And I heard anyway back and can double check with folks that not at this time were they considering doing that. I want to make sure that as we have our discussions, Sarah used to use this line. She hasn't yet this year that, a lot of our partners think that money equals love or that, because we care about the work that we have to put dollars behind it. So we've actually cut funding for Just Foods a little bit, trimmed that in years past because of this fund balance question. We're a minor partner there. I'm glad I love the work. I'm glad to support them, but I didn't support the extra 50,000 at this time.
And I guess I did hear that they have tapped into their fund balance and that they do plan on tapping into that fund balance here in the near future. I did support the funding. We do know that there are going to be considerable challenges in meeting our food needs across the county. Andrea spoke to the increased need, the increased capacity that they're seeing, the struggles that they're seeing to meet the current needs, the uptick in the individuals that are coming through the door. It's just going to continue to grow. We have not even hit the school season. Our teachers are not in session. This is July. Students are not here. We do not know what our pantries are going to need when students do get here. I absolutely do believe that they need this funding.
I appreciate the case you make, Commissioner Anderson, and this is one of the ones that I waffled with, and ultimately why I didn't include it is because of their significant fund balance and specifically in proportion to the requests that they're asking for us. And also knowing that there's more change and more escalation in, I think, the crisis at hand coming down the pike, most likely. I think all signs point to that. For me, I could be moved to partially fund it. I don't think, and because I do see that there's a need. And I also, part of what I'm interested in more long-term beyond this budget cycle is kind of understanding from Just Food and potentially other partners relevant, to the to food scarcity, what a more holistic strategy could or might look like, and does the county see a role in further investing in that? But if we were to fully fund their request, it bumps them up into a service agreement area. And while I have all faith that, our staff would figure that out, and Just Food said they could figure it out too, I'm not really clear what the measurables or metrics would be around. We've not had a very full conversation about that piece of safety net services. So if we were to, bump them up into this service agreement realm, it's a bigger conversation to me. So I would support some partial funding because it's, for example, if we were to fund half of their request was 50, right? If we were to fund half their request, that keeps them in the community partner realm under the threshold of no service agreements. It's some infusion of cash. I would hope that it encouraged them to realize what they might need to tap into in their reserves. Because they are, I mean, their fund balance percentage to budget is 117% of their budget. So, to me that, and I'm not saying they need to tap into all of it. There's a lot of strategies around that to consider. And I recognize there's a lot of moving parts to it. So I'm moved towards partial funding because I really believe in the mission of Just Food. I know food scarcity is a huge issue, but I'm interested in keeping them in that community partner bucket, if you will, for a little bit of simplicity and continuity. And if we want to have a larger conversation about what does food policy and funding look like related to our overall safety net and continuum of care services, I think that's a conversation worth having. But we haven't had it. So I'm not moved to support the full request at this point, given all those factors.
Okay, I'll join you at 25, will you?
Yes, I will join.
Okay, that's 3. Let's
Yeah.
move on.
Because I understand the complexities around the agreement. And so, yeah, if we can agree on whatever number gets us to that level, right, where they're not at that agreement, then yes.
I'm fine with that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. You okay? So we have a supplement of COLA. I think this is the extension. Yeah.
Yeah, I supported that COLA adjustment. I don't think it's worth talking about a whole lot at $5,364. I just need a third vote.
I will say, I think the work that we have done with extension to understand how their agents are funded from the state level, and my understanding of their request was that followed the increase from the state level. This would then change the dynamic for some employees. It would change the pay level for some employees and not others. I agree with you. $5,000 is not a lot of money, but I also think it would put them in sort of 2 different pay categories.
As an organization, Extension does have 2 pay categories just by definition. Some of those are funded partially through the state, through K-State, and some of those are funded basically from what we give to the extension. So I don't know that that's going to go away regardless of how we vote on this.
Fair point.
I also funded the cost of living increase. We have a statute. And then taking a look at some of the other funding categories and other community partners that have asked for cost of living increases and seeing that the county has funded other cost of living increases, I went ahead and funded it.
We have 3 people on this one. We got 2. Okay. Commissioner Willie? Nope. Okay. We'll move on to stabilize support ed operations. This was a request for 170,000. We had 2 on the consensus value index.
I think part of that larger discussion that's coming, I'm not comfortable being their sole funder. I don't have enough information back from them to feel like that would be appropriate at all. If we're the sole funder for a nonprofit organization and we have our own overhead as an organization, as the county, and paying for their overhead to run kind of a parallel nonprofit for particular. So I want us to invest in truancy. But I just philosophically have a difficulty of being, the reason we work through partner organizations is because they can bring braided funding to the table, and then, take the initiative for that work. This isn't that. There's not braided funding being brought forward.
So, and to be clear here, we had one commissioner cutting funding completely for CSC here and one adding to funding for CSC here. And I do think it's right. And I think it's worth talking about because I have serious concerns that I didn't recommend in my proposed budget that we increase our funding for the Center for Supportive Communities. I don't think we should, but I do think that the existing funding that we are giving them of 150,000, we should retain in the budget to stabilize support ed operations. I don't think, so I guess I want to have some commission conversation about that direction, so that we can be clear with CSC that we would, are we interested in having an agreement with them in 2026? Because at this point, I'm very nervous that they will not be able to support truancy in 2026 without AmeriCorps funding, even if you gave them this 170,000, because they would have to establish a whole new method with the University of Kansas of getting student mentors to be involved in the program. And if they, and how would they subsidize them? In the past, they were subsidized with AmeriCorps. Now they don't have that. So they would need to be getting like practicum hours, which is a whole different process at the university. And so I'm nervous about that approach. That being said, I understand I haven't told commissioners any ideas as to how we would use this existing $150,000 to stabilize support ed operations. I'd like to bring that back to you later this summer, starting in those conversations, so that you could hear about a potential modification in the approach as to how we would continue to do elementary age truancy if we were not partnering with CSC.
And I put that 150 in the commissioner's contingency budget for truancy.
I think we still need to be involved in truancy. And I think we partnered with CSC when KU stopped doing the program. And I think we've given it time to sort of mature and sort of figure out its direction. I would like to see our criminal justice services. I would like the courts to sort of, to the degree that they can, the DA's office and the school district, to work together to come up with some sort of proposal about how we're going to do truancy. Right now, we've been very supportive of truancy. I'm not always sure. I feel like the school district is on the same page with us. They have listed as a goal for themselves to reduce the high levels of truancy. I believe support ed is providing the function that we've asked them to do. I want to see something more comprehensive. It may take more dollars. And Sarah, if you think we need to put in that would be a recommendation. That was why during the hearing, I asked if maybe we use CSC in a contractual way. Maybe we don't need all of their services. Maybe we need some of their services. I don't really know. I think they could certainly be at the table in that conversation, but I would recommend taking what we currently allocate towards CSC, putting it in the criminal justice services budget or in the commissioner's budget, and bring it back to us with sort of a more comprehensive plan that involves all the partners working together.
And I flagged it here so that we could have a conversation about it, because I don't want us to have a gap, right? Because we have to address truancy. We have to ensure that we retain our kiddos in school. We have to ensure that we improve our graduation rates. So I would be in agreement, Commissioner Kelly, with a contingency plan for setting those dollars aside so that we can work better with our schools to support them in identifying that plan, because they are boots on the ground, right? They are seeing what's happening every single day, and they have that unique lens and perspective as to what parents and caregivers are seeing and dealing with, but at the same time, kiddos, why they're not going to school, what their challenges are. And we really need to listen and learn so that that plan and that framework can actually be developed to really best suit those from that lived experience. Because if it's not developed from that framework, I don't think it's going to work.
So did I hear from that you are wanting to put it in the contingency budget marked for truancy?
Yes.
That work for you?
So,
Yeah. So we'll move it to the commissioner's budget. Yeah,
Yeah, I support the idea of the 150,000 that's the base, quote unquote, base funding. I'm not supportive of the additional supplemental request. I agree with Commissioner Kelly that we may learn that it's going to cost more, but we don't have a fuller picture of who all is invested in that. What are we paying for, et cetera. So, but the base funding as a set aside, yes, I'm not comfortable adding to that number at this time.
did you get what you needed there, Sarah? Okay. Kansas Holistic Defenders is up next. Index was 244,000. This was for an additional social worker, and it looks like we had budget reduction and partial funding for the supplemental request, and maybe someone put it in contingency. I think I sort of explained earlier, I put some dollars in contingency. I don't know that it really has to do with Kansas Holistic Defenders, to be honest, but it sort of overlapped in that eviction space for me.
I reduced it to 20,000 on the basis of talking to Sam. He thought if he could get any support from the county, he could leverage grants to make up the difference. Since I talked to him, though, I'm at one point there was a plan to just loan a Bert Nash employee to office there and handle the issues that come up. Prior Bert Nash management wasn't in favor of that. Maybe new management is. So that would be another alternative. The acuity level of some of the people he works with, both on eviction and misdemeanors, is such that they feel it's beyond their realm of expertise to deal with them.
I want to be clear here. In this 2 votes, we had a commissioner that recommended reducing them and a commissioner that recommended adding.
I didn't add. From the 44, I went to 20.
Oh, but you would be added, you would be adding $20,000 to their existing funding.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I meant to say.
Reducing the supplement, but you're saying another commissioner
Wanted
suggested
to
a reduction
reduce-
to the overall base budget.
Got it. Yep.
Okay, well, that was me. And I wanted to kind of flag that bigger discussion, which I know we're trying to cram a lot into a small season of doing this in budget. We had some data coming back saying that Holistic Defenders costs more than panel defense, but the outcomes were very similar. And that's a hard one for me to, like, what are we gaining enough by working through one particular new nonprofit, and they're doing other things also. So are we getting what we're paying for? Where does this other time come from that they're contracting for other work when we've got a certain number of caseloads set against the people that are in our contract that we're paying for? So it wasn't to take away from the work of indigent defense. So, I mean, whatever I reduced here, I had put in the commissioner's contingency budget, which is getting a lot of use lately, but I just wanted us to have that discussion. I've never felt like base funding has to be secure. I mean, I think that's a basis for the discussion, not necessarily that every year everybody should expect to get what they got last year. It's a new commission, it's a new budget process. So I did flag that one for discussion.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we start with just the supplemental and see if there's any traction. Which I'm not hearing any other commissioners jump up and say they're interested in the supplemental, so.
There may be another way of solving that problem for them.
Okay, so that's off the list, and then I just wanted to separate the two so that we know, like, make sure there's no other support for the potential of a supplemental. Then Commissioner Kelly, did you have?
Yeah, I want to make sure, one thing I think we can still ask Sarah to say, we want to have a deeper discussion about Kansas Holistic Defenders without putting it in the contingency budget. Like I have some of the same concerns I just heard you articulate, Commissioner Willie, about how many cases they can take on, what is a realistic caseload, you know, what is the actual cost per case, and what are those outcomes per case. I think Kansas Holistic Defenders has done a good job when they're here, less from what they report to staff on those outcomes. So I want to keep working on it. I'm not sure I want to, like you said, we're putting a lot in the contingency budget, but I do want to have that and sort of look at that as a whole. I don't know if, yeah, that's all I'll say. I didn't want to hold the budget hostage, but I do want to have that conversation.
So if there's a consensus around holding the base funding flat, I'm fine to go along with that. It's that conversation that I'm wanting and finding out when the timing for that might be most appropriate.
Agree that a larger conversation is warranted, but want to keep their funding where it's at.
Commissioners, I think you handled the last two items earlier today related to Burt Nash and headquarters. So I think you're done.
I'd like to talk about revenue at some point.
Now's a good time.
Anytime in the last 2 weeks. We're putting time. Yes.
Okay, on sales tax revenue, you have 150,000 in for training for the World Cup, but we don't have any additional revenue recognized from World Cup.
Correct.
Oh. My understanding was that the training would be contracted, but wouldn't happen and wouldn't be paid for unless we became a base site. Did I understand that,
Correct.
Sarah?
Yeah, that was I don't think we would move. We will know if we're in a base camp this winter. And then we would then look to do those exercises. I then think if we are a base camp, I'm going to know better a year from now if, what we think the, implication would be. But generally when these things happen, I mean, sales tax revenues are received in arrears. So after the World Cup, about 3 months later, I'm going to know what we got. So it's hard for me to estimate at this point what that actual fiscal impact of sales tax will be. But you have to prepare in advance. So if the commissioners want to take a risk that we will not achieve that sales tax target, that's fine. I just didn't want it to be my recommendation because I didn't want to be held responsible for not meeting that target. And I did forget, Jake's right. We have several things we said we were going to come back to. So I was maybe overly excited about us being done. So thanks, Jake.
The other thing was interest income. How much do we have in there for interest income?
I think I put 6.5 million. Jake, can you check for me there?
Wasn't the treasurer's thing at 7 point something?
Yes, correct, Commissioner. I'm just nervous that as we try to build a sustainable revenue picture, that 7.7 number is not sustainable. If the commissioners, I'm not sure the 6.5 is sustainable. 6.6 is what we built in. So if the commissioners want a higher number, we can do that. I would just anticipate that in future years, you're going to have a revenue decrease. And you know, I've talked about this several times, so I'm looking for commission direction in terms of where to put that number.
I, just as a general, for home finances, finances, I would rather budget conservatively and be pleasantly surprised than end up and not be able to meet our budget obligations because we made a guess that didn't come through. So I've always been comfortable with kind of the way Sarah gives us recommendations on income, on revenue projections. I wouldn't be pushing for a change in that. If other commissioners want to talk about it, it's okay.
No, I think Commissioner Dorsey, you've identified two of the most volatile things we could have. And we, don't know if we're going to be a base camp. Two, we don't know if it's Brazil or some smaller country, right? So it could go very high or it could not have that big of an impact. I, I, I certainly hope for the best in that situation, and that would give us sort of other opportunities in the future. As far as interest income and investment income, I don't share the rosy picture going forward based on some of the federal actions that are happening for our economy. I'm in fact very concerned. Like, I think we may be heading toward more recession. We have talked multiple times, and our partners have talked to us multiple times about how some of the decisions that are being made at the federal level are going to impact families here. And I don't see sales tax increasing. I don't see investment income increasing. I think so. Maybe it will. Maybe we'll see. I don't know. I know we hire Sarah, and Sarah works with people to get accurate representations. If we don't have faith in those I have faith in those revenue projections, and I'm not willing to make an adjustment based on hope for better.
And sales tax is one, I understand, and we've talked about the impact of KU games coming back here and the potential convention center. The largest driver on our sales tax budget is vehicles. The largest item that any person pays sales tax on is a car. If tariffs impact car sales, that's a whole lot of football games in my view. So I would rather hedge that bet and see how it goes because, and remember, we don't get all of the sales tax from those, if they're coming here and they're buying dinner downtown and, which we all want to encourage, that's a lot of cheeseburgers at Burger Stand to make up for a car.
I know this is, we touched on this about the training through emergency management. I think those are identified gaps that we need that training anyway. So I think, World Cup is a reason to make it urgent and put it on the timetable, but it's been a need. So I would hope that training would go through regardless.
My concern with those two items is reducing mill levy if there's room in those other two buckets.
I think we have to see. My calculator in my head is telling me we may still be able to reduce some mill levy. So,
highlighted in blue on this screen are the ones that you said you wanted to come back and talk about. Currently, this item, the ongoing support for the Permanent Supportive Housing HUD grant replacement project, is in the Behavioral Health Fund. I think the commissioners wanted to talk about potentially moving it back to the mill levy if you needed to. Do you want me, let me just review all of these and then you can decide how you want to talk about them. For EMS service, we currently have the 1.5 million built in. I'm just going to say that. And that is the blue option plus some contingency. Commissioners, I did receive some information from Lawrence related to if cuts were restored, what that impact on us would be and what that impact on them would be, that I think they're going to talk about in their further conversations. I'm going to tell you, if they restored all of their cuts, it could have as much as a $700,000 to a $750,000 impact on our budget. Now, the total impact for them then is, 2 million, I'd say almost 2 million. So it's a huge impact for them if they restore cuts. So here's what, I mean, the likelihood to me that all of those cuts get restored is not likely. I do think what you're saying with this option is that you're supportive of moving towards the Station 6, Ambulance 6 expansion with the blue option and holding in contingency to make sure that can happen and or you can meet your potential cut. I know I would need to come back to you to have those conversations once I had a better handle on what the city of Lawrence was planning on doing. That's my interpretation of where.
Will we
stand.
know that tomorrow?
No, you won't. All you're going to know tomorrow is what they maximum mill levy they're going to set. You're not going to know where their budget's going to be. That will not be decided until September after you've set your budget and we've published and sent to the state. Okay. The next one is the 2 network administrator positions for the sheriff's office. My understanding is we have one built in right now. There's consensus for one, but I think there was conversation about talking about an additional one. And then I got to go back to this. And I got to scroll down. And the tenants to homeowners was one you wanted to come back to. And I think that's it. Oh, CAC. Did I miss it? I didn't. Did I?
So when we do our worksheets at home.
Oh, yeah, the $10,000 on the CAC, that, do you want to pay for that out of, I think I had it as one-time behavioral health. Is that where you have it, Brooke?
Which one?
The CAC position, this one right here. I think commissioners indicated that they wanted to pay for it one time out of behavioral health and then see what CAC comes back with in a future year. Is that consensus? Okay. So those are the ones that we had questions around.
How much do we have in contingency in the commissioner's budget right now?
Well, around 1.9. I'd love more time to do that math and check it. So, but I would say, I think you have about 1.9 million, which is, that is unallocated contingency above that. But I'd love some time to make sure we're right and bring it back to you. I think the question for commissioners is if you're comfortable with these blue items, I'd like some direction on tenants to homeowners and the additional network admin.
And I was wondering if I would like for staff to go back and do some math and come maybe before we talk about the blue things that are up there, because I know as I'm doing the budget worksheet at home, I'm always looking at what is that mill levy impact? What is that impact on behavioral health sales tax operations versus one-time funds? And we've talked about each of these lines in a vacuum from that. And I would say these things that we've parked for further discussion, I would feel more confident us talking about them if we were also looking at the long-term impacts.
Where do we stand on the mill levy at the moment?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So I would say that the mill levy is still flat at this point, but there is room to reduce that to what I think is close to 1.9. I would love time to check our math.
1.9 million, not
1 million, $1 million, $1.9 million, not 1.9 mils.
So maybe we adjourn till tomorrow?
Commissioner Reed, very good.
I'm almost there with you. I think we're really close and we do need to let staff do some further number crunching based on all our conversations and come back. I feel like there's a couple of quick things that we could clear up. I actually thought that I thought we had consensus on only one network administrator for sheriff's office, so I didn't have a note with a question mark. I'm just checking with my fellow commissioners that they don't
Okay.
remember a
That's
question
all
about
good
that.
there.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're
You
just
can
stick with the one.
unhighlight, that's just one. And then the CAC, I also thought we had consensus on that one. So then that really just leaves the HUD grant replay. Oh yeah, the tenants to homeowners. I don't really remember where, I feel like I muddied the waters for the commissioners who were supportive of that. So my notes don't remind me where we landed on that. And I thought that one was probably simple enough that we could resolve now and leave the EMS service or, well, personally, I'm fine with just how Sarah, framed it for us, that 1.5 million set aside already, because I don't think the city commission meeting is going to tell us anything different. But the tenants to homeowners was one I thought there was consensus still to fund it, and I don't remember anything differently. So I just thought I'd check in with commissioners, because that seems kind of like low hanging fruit to me that doesn't need to be saved until tomorrow.
I didn't have consensus on tenants to homeowners. We were getting a little lost there. We did include the family promise. I do have notes, right?
Commissioners, would be okay if staff included it in what we see tomorrow. And then, maybe if we're unsettled then, maybe revisiting it then.
Yep, I think that's fair. And then for me, the other thing to just unpack kind of all together is I have my own list, but a quick list of what we have said or what staff believe we have allocated to the Behavioral Health Sales Fund, and look at all those together
Yep. We can
and
do that.
determine if there's any we want to move elsewhere and reduce that impact on that fund. That's my one other conversation in a vacuum, I guess, that I want to make sure we dig into
Sarah,
holistically tomorrow.
Can you scroll up just a little bit? I want to make sure we hit all the blues then.
The other one is the HUD one.
Yeah, the HUD one, which is one I think Commissioner Reed is talking about,
Yeah.
where is that one going?
Yeah, it's currently in the behavioral health. So what we
Stuff.
can do is we could include tenants to homeowners as a behavioral health project and show you tomorrow all of what you've obligated in the behavioral health fund plus the $1 million in crisis services. So you could take a look at that. We could calculate, clean up the spreadsheet, make sure we're good on the math, and determine how much capacity is under the funding contingency. Does that sound like a good order for tomorrow? And originally I was thinking like I could save you, we could come in at 4, but maybe we should just stick and come in at 9
Yeah.
since we did. Let's just do that.
Just do 9.
And the last thought I had, Commissioner Dorsey, to some of your questions about mill levy, I think part of the conversation for us to have tomorrow that some of us have, some commissioners have indicated preferences for, but we haven't had a full conversation about what each of our thoughts are about whether we're maintaining a flat mill levy, working to try and reduce it. That I don't know that I know where everybody's at with that. So I just say that maybe that's a placeholder to start the conversation tomorrow and know what our approach is individually with that.
Anything else, commissioners, staff, anything? Okay, good work today. You got 10 minutes back. Just enough time to go over your spreadsheets. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thank you.